Functional groups are the patterns that occur within a molecule and determine many of the chemical properties of a molecule. Since functional groups are so important for determining what reactions a molecule will go through, it's essential that we're able to recognize these patterns as we see them come up in molecules. So today we talk about functional groups and where to find them. Take, for example, the carboxylic acid shown. Carboxylic acids will undergo the same set of steps, the mechanism, every time they react with other classes of molecules. So in order to understand the reactivity of molecules that contain carboxylic acids, we need to recognize carboxylic acids when they show up in molecules. When we talk about the reactivity of a functional group, we often simplify the drawing by labeling the carbon chain that makes up the rest of the molecule as R. R just means that there are some carbons there, but we don't care which ones. A molecule's reactivity is governed by the functional groups it has. The functional groups that are shown in this table are some of the most important functional groups that we'll see. We'll notice that there's one more functional group that we need to learn called an imine that we'll show in the slides as well. These are the functional groups that you'll be tested on. Some of the functional groups look very similar at first glance, so it makes sense to try to identify what separates the functional groups. Different atoms are usually the lowest hanging fruit, but functional groups also are differentiated by multiple bonds, or functional groups that are combined on the same carbon. There are also some things that functional groups are definitely not. Alkanes generally are considered functional groups, that's just carbon-carbon single bonds, because they're present in all molecules and they don't really react very well. And rings aren't considered functional groups except when they're aromatic or if they're epoxides. We'll compare several of the functional group categories that are commonly confused in the next slides. Alkanes, alkenes, alkynes all differ only by the number of bonds. Aromatics look kind of like alkenes, but they are extra stabilized because of resonance, like we saw in the last section. Aromatics, at least for our current purposes, are going to be rings of 6 carbons with alternating double bonds. Alcohols are the simplest OH containing molecule, but OH is on the same carbon as a double bonded O are carboxylic acids. So even though it looks like it has an alcohol in it, the carboxylic acid is a different functional group. OH is on the same carbon as another single bonded oxygen are hemiacetals, which are similar to acetals, which have 2 oxygen carbon oxygens on the same carbon. Double bonded oxygens are incredibly common in chemistry and biology, and all the difference comes from what is right next to the double bonded oxygen. Ketones have carbons on both sides. Aldehydes have an H, carboxylic acids have an OH, esters have an OR, again R just means any carbons, and amides an N. Ethers are the simplest form of the carbon-oxygen-carbon pattern. Esters are similar but have a carbon double bonded to one of the carbons. Ethers that share a carbon with alcohols are hemiacetals, but ethers that share a carbon with another ether are acetals. Epoxide is an exceptionally special case. They are only 3-membered rings containing an ether. Nitrogen can show up in a wide variety of ways. Nitrogens with a single bond and no carbon double bonded to oxygen are amines, regardless of how many single bonds that are attached. If there is a carbon double bonded to an oxygen on an adjacent carbon, it becomes an amide. Triple bonded nitrogens are nitriles, and double bonded nitrogens are imines. Imines aren't listed in the table in this chapter, but are really important in biological mechanisms. Write it down because you're going to need to memorize amines along with the others. Alkyl halides are often indicated by a bond to X. X just means any halogen. Thiols look exactly like alcohols, but with sulfur. There are lots of ways in which thiols and alcohols are similar, but also there are a lot of ways in which they are different, so they're considered a different functional group. Some functional groups change identity when they share carbons, but if they are on the same molecule and don't share a carbon, they will function as independent functional groups. Amines and carboxylic acids, for example, can be separated by a single carbon and be an amino acid that has all the properties of a carboxylic acid and all the properties of an amine. Most amino acids actually have additional functional groups that come off at the side as well, come off of that same carbon. These give additional properties to the 20 naturally occurring amino acids. Here are some side chain functional groups that are alkanes, aromatics, and a thioether, an ether with a sulfur instead of an oxygen. Here are some more that have amides, thiols, and alcohols, again changing the structure of that amino acid and changing its reactivity. Amino acids could also have additional amines or carboxylic acids. The functional groups on these amino acids help our bodies to facilitate all the reactions performed by proteins, which are most of the reactions in our bodies, all from different functional groups.